All right. Well, so, I've been training for this triathlon. Okay, I went bowling on Tuesday night. Bowling, little Hazel, the youngest in our family, turned 8, and she wanted to go to a family bowling night. And we said, "Are you sure you want to go to family bowling night?" Yep. So we went, and now I realize it's probably been about 15 years since I've bowled, which I never was like an avid bowler anyway, but for some reason I was the one that just took it on. And of course, the famous last words, "Watch how it's done, people!" Poof! Fell back, twisted my ankle, thought I broke it. Hazel's like in tears. I said, "It's fine, I'm fine." And the lady that was running the shoe rental and everything came over with a big bag of ice, and she said, "What happened? Do you think it was just in the approach?" Oh yeah, that's exactly what it was. Oh my goodness. I'll just remind you all, in case you get invited to a family bowling night, the floors are slick. When you're trying to be sassy, don't do it. So I'm a little gimpy, but I'm doing all right. Thought that was a good intro. How many of you were here last Sunday? No guilt, okay. I did think of David's, wonderful entry story about the cousin and his thinking about it and connecting. Here's mine. That's why I'm the Associate Minister. Okay. So David did kick us off last week, I think. He's really been on a roll lately. It's a hard act to follow. He did a wonderful diving into the idea of oneness that we talk so frequently about. As we kicked off honoring and celebrating as much as we can during this hour together the Season for Peace and Nonviolence, which is, I think, in its 18th year, which commemorates the assassinations. It runs between the assassination period of Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., so those 7 weeks that starts on January 30th. And David, last week, I just want to recap. We talk a lot about oneness here. It's a main part of our theology, if we are to say we have a theology, which we do. We like to say we don't, but we do. I mean, we have a certain set of beliefs that are foundational to unity. And that one of, oneness, that we are all connected. And I feel like I've said this before, but I'll say it again because it sort of tips us into what I want to go deeper with. That's a good feeling, like it feels good, but just as you said, we're all one except for them. Right? That's where the rubber meets the road when you start. It's great here, pretty much. No, we could probably find a few of you here that annoy each other, but aside from that great feeling that I think really is what leads a lot of you to find unity, of recognizing that there are many paths to one God, honoring that and finding for yourself what is most meaningful for you, and in that process sort of coming together with people that are fairly open-minded about that. It doesn't have to be my way. It doesn't have to be a certain path, right? So we honor that we are all connected, but what does that really mean? And he did a great job of explaining it, and I would just add today that when I finally got the amazingness, if you will, I have had coffee. I'm not really sure what's going on with my speech. That I think of when we think of, and I've done this with you before, but do it again, you think of all that you can think of God to be, and we even might remove that word God because it becomes personal, which is fine. We relate to God personally, but to limit it in any kind of persona, we take it even bigger, right? We sometimes use divine mind, just the source of all that is. And when you think of, for some reason I get the image of just like all the galaxies, that's like all that energy. That is part of the creation too, right? And you hear that all the time, we're made of stardust. Like we have that energetically what makes the galaxies and the stars. And David did a great job last week of reminding us of all of creation, of our world, of our planet, of our physical experience, as well as our animal kingdom, not just our humanity or human experience, but we are connected to all of that because that source energy created all of it. And so in a very real way, at the very basis of our beingness, we come from that same galactic energy, if you will. And so it's in that way that we are quite literally one. Now, what we do with it, and as he said, where we're born, what culture, what socioeconomic status, what gender, all of those things make us appear in all these different shades and different expressions. But at the core, we're connecting with that core energy. Oh boy, and then there comes some science. All right, I'm going to ask you right now, are there any quantum physicists in the room? Robert, get up here. Any physicists? Any scientists? Oh, we are in luck. Great. So I'm going to butcher this. I'm pretty sure. Dara, she's kind of a chemist. How many of you for whom, if I spoke about more than 1 minute scientifically, would begin to nod off? Oh, not bad. We've got a pretty interesting group here. All right. Well, it was news to me. I'm going to just say this too. It's coming to me. My mother used to say all the time, "You're a little bit slow on the uptake." And I would get so mad, especially because once I graduated college, I was the first person in our immediate family to graduate college. I said, I went to college and I got really good grades. Oh, you're very intelligent, but you're just a little a little slow on putting it all together. And she's absolutely right. Or it might be just the process of living long enough, right, where you have enough intellectual experience and enough actual experience and enough scientific experience or whatever. It all comes together to form wisdom. It's not just little pieces of information that you can't put together. And what I'm saying that about my mother is you all may have been there years ago, but I'm sorry, I just got here to this great revelation that I'm really feeling so passionate about, which, oh, you guys are so lovely to stick with me in this. We are roughly using this book called The Bond by Lynn McTaggart, How to Fix Your Falling Down World. I do not recommend that you run out and buy it. It's not like we're going to do a book study. There are a few copies in the library, in the bookstore. I mean, it's interesting, but it's full so far of science. So I was panicked when David said, "You're going to do that chapter on," and I said, "Oh my gosh, thanks so much." But what I hope to do is give you the highlights from this and then pull together this revelation that from the oneness piece that he already set us up for so nicely about how this would relate to peace and nonviolence. And he also reminded us last week that when you think of peace and nonviolence, many of us go to the large world scale, right? What could I possibly do to end war, to end famine, to end genocide? What could I do? Does anybody feel that way? Right. And I have often felt that way. In fact, in reading this and working on this, I realized that I'd pretty much gotten on the apathetic train. Like there's nothing, not for me personally, I mean, I'm happy, but when I think of what's going on, I just don't even want to know. Sometimes because I feel helpless and I feel sad and I feel disappointed. And what this has pointed out to me is that there is something we can do. I'm sorry, that's right in your face, isn't it? And by doing what we do in our own consciousness and in our own life, we really are healing the whole, if you will. And so she's done a really good job of citing a lot of studies. Well, let me just start off I'm going to read this opening. Get ready. It's going to talk about science. But just to give you the backdrop upon which she begins. For the past several decades, ever since I began pondering the meaning of cutting-edge discoveries in physics and other branches of science, I have been struck by how much of scientific theory, and consequently our model of the way things work, is currently going up in smoke. With every new finding in the sciences, yet another cherished notion we hold about ourselves is overturned. An entirely new scientific story is emerging that challenges many of our Newtonian and Darwinian assumptions. I'd like to know what yours are. Newtonian and Darwinian assumptions. Although, as she points out, we are affected by those, by that theme of the scientific revolution, by the industrial revolution. I can remember being a psychology student and learning about the history of psychology as a field. They so desperately wanted to be considered a science because that was the only way to really be legitimate. And the problem is, how can you empirically study the psyche of human beings? It's challenging. How can you be objective about it? How can you dissect it? So the whole issue of, do we really know the whole when we break it apart into its parts? And the answer that we will hear is no, there's something present in the totality, in the whole, that is lost when we start piecing out. All right, that's enough science. So we really are at the effect, sort of, culturally, of the impact and the power of science. The latest evidence from quantum physics offers the extraordinary possibility that all of life exists in a dynamic relationship of cooperation. Don't read the newspaper. But seriously, the latest evidence from quantum physics offers the extraordinary possibility that all of life exists in a dynamic relationship of cooperation. Quantum physicists now recognize that the universe is not a collection of separate things jostling around in empty space. All matter exists in a vast quantum web of connection, and a living thing at its most elemental is an energy system involved in a constant transfer of information with its environment. How you doing? Okay. Rather than a cluster of individual self-contained atoms and molecules, objects and living beings are now more properly understood as dynamic and protean processes in which parts of one thing and parts of another continuously trade places. This revolution is not confined to physics. Extraordinary new discoveries in biology and the social sciences have profoundly altered our view of the relationship between living things and their environment. Frontier biologists, psychologists, and sociologists have all found evidence that individuals are far less individual than we thought we were. Between the smallest particles of our being, between our body and our environment, between ourselves and all the people with whom we are in contact, between every member of every societal cluster, there is a bond, a connection so integral and profound that there is no longer a clear demarcation between the end of one thing and the beginning of another. The world essentially operates not through the activity of individual things, but in the connection between them. In a sense, the space between the things. The most essential aspect of life is not the isolated thing, whether it's the subatomic particle or a full-fledged living being. It is the relationship itself, the inseparable, irreducible bond. Nature's most basic impulse is not a struggle for dominion, but a constant and irrepressible drive for wholeness. Any questions? Okay, so now we put together this idea. It's profound and really wonderful that we already know that we are connected energetically. And we know this, right? I mean, we can walk into a room and someone has an attitude, or sometimes we might have an attitude. I doubt it, and people are affected. You can really feel it. I've been going a couple times to a restorative yoga class lately, which is very gentle and just so supportive. And the woman who does it does Reiki, and she openly says that. As she's guiding us through this, she'll also be working with the energy. And I gotta say, sometimes I think, okay, you work with the energy. I do. I have that part of me that doubts, you're not gonna work with my energy. You're not gonna. Well, both times I am in the poses and it's so luscious. There's something going on there that is so supportive and so clear and so whole that I thought, okay, Reiki master, you have something going on. So we know that energetically we affect each other, and that we affect each other certainly through what we say and do, but also that connection energetically. This is so big, sometimes I lose my place. So we're one, we affect each other, we're connected. Somehow in our human experience, and I'm not even about making anybody wrong about it, science, God, our parents, who would we make wrong about it? But we fell into this, very early on actually, didn't we? We fell into this separation, this fixation with separation. We're separate from God, I'm separate from you. I am me, you are you. And so, in a very real way, we took our focus off of what is available in that connection of energy, of wholeness. And I feel like what this work is promoting and showing is that in doing so, we have really harmed ourselves. And some of the crises that we see are the direct effects of that. Now, it could, I know that none of us in this room could feel like that we've been so selfish that we have brought along genocides in Africa, right? It doesn't feel like a direct correlation, nor am I making that direct correlation, but to recognize that there's a wholeness to this system that is bigger than us, that everything we do and everybody else does, for whatever reason, affects the totality of that whole. And so in a very real way, what we do individually to clear up our experience, to open our hearts, to heal our hearts, to connect one with another, to forgive, whatever it is that we're working on, to clear our consciousness and to clear our ability to connect, really does make a difference to the whole picture. She cites many studies of loneliness. I think this is interesting, that loneliness is a key variable in people dying. Research study at Columbia University studied 655 stroke patients and found that those who were socially isolated were twice as likely to have another stroke within 5 years compared to those who had strong social connections. And there was another group of researchers at Brigham Young who were just so intrigued by the effects of loneliness on health. They analyzed the data from 148 studies comparing human interactions with health outcomes over an average of 7 years. I just had to do all that in case there was any scientists in here. And their stark conclusion was that relationship of any sort, good or bad, improves your odds of survival by 50%. Isolation was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, being an alcoholic, or being twice as harmful as obesity. So that's intense. And they also, just so you know, it was interesting that can I just say this? Are you guys up for a little fun? Or should I keep it serious? Because this is stark. This is a stark conclusion, and I don't mean to make light of it, but isolation was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day or being an alcoholic, and twice as harmful as obesity. And so I wrote, in other words, even if you have to eat, drink, and smoke through some of your hardest relationships, don't give them up. Now that's just playful. I am not suggesting we stay connected with toxic people or harmful people, but the connection, it's not just isolation. So they made the distinction that there were people that were isolated due to where they lived and that sort of thing, but because of their isolation, they had very meaningful connections with the small groups there. So even though they were somewhat isolated, we would think them as isolated. They did not have these symptoms because they were connected with small groups. So it's that meaningful connection. It's the, do you see me? I am here, right? And we know that our elderly population, really, that's the population that they studied the most, those people over 65. Because they've lost, presumably they might have lost a partner, they might have lost friends. So that connection piece is so intrinsic that it leads to early premature death. So again, I have such great points about this. When we think of wholeness, When you think of wholeness, what do you think of? We talk about wholeness all the time. What? Vitality? Happiness? Health? Love? Abundance? Joy? Prosperity? Enthusiasm? Connection. So we can, I often see that pie chart that any good therapist will start you out with if you're sort of just off, you need some support, and they say, where are you? Here's your spiritual center, here's your family, your connection, your career, your creativity, where are you falling short? So looking at sort of a balance of life, a fullness of life. And this work is suggesting that that is more tribal than we realize. That me getting my career pie chart up to speed and my family parts, that's important because it connects me to my purpose, but there's also a bigger circle that is pulling at us for that connection, to find that wholeness. So we think of the perfect pattern of health. We think of that perfect pattern that begins. That's the other thing that this was very interesting, that quantum physics has found that at the very most tiniest subatomic level, I don't remember the words. No, there's something smaller than the quarks. I was going to say quarks, but I guess they found a whole other little nest egg of little things in there and they can't find them or study them or know anything about them until they connect. They're not stable enough to even study. So even at that level, there's a connection, a relationship. It's profound. And so I feel like some of the deep pain that we feel, some of the longing that we feel, some of the just disconnect that we feel, even though we might be living somewhat happy, productive lives, connected with family and friends, and you're here, is that whole system sort of needing wholeness, aching really for wholeness, right? We feel that when something's out of balance, something's out of alignment. So what can you do? What can we do individually that would recorrect, rebalance that wholeness, that center of wholeness? You can think for yourself. I think most immediately is recognizing our own ability and willingness to connect, right? Are we protecting ourselves? Are we afraid? Our own ability to, boy, it got real quiet, to forgive anything that's blocking our own connection with wholeness and within each other. So that inner work really is important to the whole. And then it's only from that place when we are connected and whole that we really step into the world and see the world as that operating system, right? That we are connected with, intimately connected with. Does that make sense? I don't know where the times went because I have a lot more to say. But lucky for you, I'm out of time. Oh, I just want to say one more thing about the loneliness. In London, since Britain voted to leave the European Union for more than a year ago, Europeans had mockingly said that the decision will result in an isolated, lonely nation. But Britain, in fact, already has a serious problem with loneliness, research has found. More than 9 million people in that country often or always feel lonely, according to a 2017 report. The issue prompted the Prime Minister to appoint a minister of loneliness. For far too many people, loneliness is the sad reality of modern life. So, in all seriousness, I can think of times in my own life, and some of you may be there right now, where you did feel lonely, where I did feel lonely, and there's nothing quite like it. It's deadly. We have the science to prove it now, but now we know. This kind of makes me feel better about how bad it can feel sometimes, because it's an innate need to connect. It's more than just having friends and being accepted. That's part of it. But this, the author calls it, we're born to belong. We're not really born to dominate. We're born to belong, to connect, to cooperate, and to give. And so how can we nourish that regardless of what we see going on, right? How can we continue to nourish that in ourselves to stay connected with that and know that in doing that, we really are making a difference to that whole system?